as well as our exhibitors are crucial to our ability to produce this event, and we look forward to hopefully doing this again next year. Now let's get our final, thank you. Let's get our final session underway, and for that I'll turn things over to my colleague from Indiana, Dave Arlen.
Okay. I'm going to ask one of the guys familiar with the screen to maybe get that back up and running again. Morgan, where are you? Winner of the TV. So, did you drive an SUV today? Thank God he drove an SUV.
I think, yeah, turn it.
So, Morgan, after we're done today, see my colleague Sam and I, we unpack the TV. We know how to pack it back up. It's extremely, you got to be very careful with it. The screen is so thin, you can crack it real easy. So you got to be very careful. I'm glad you drove a big car. That's a good thing. And thanks again to LG Electronics, who is a leader in ultra-high-def TV, for providing that. Their sets don't yet have ATSC 3.0, but stay tuned in about 6 weeks and see what happens at the CES. We'll see what's coming. So thank you to Chris. Congratulations to all of our winners. And thank you for all the exhibitors who helped us today, who donated today's door prizes. The exhibition is closed. You may have noticed they're already packed up. And so it's good to have all of you here for our final session of the day. As Chris mentioned, I'm Dave Arlen. I'm from the Indiana Broadcasters Association. Chris Winkle and I saw a good thing when we saw it, and that is what has happened here in Ohio for the last 15 years. And so we made a decision collectively, Chris Merritt, Chris Winkle, Dave Arlen, to try to put the three states together for our Midwest Broadcast Technology Conference. And I hope that it's been a good session for you today. There's lots of heads nodding. I know Chris brought a couple dozen people. We brought about 30 people from Indiana. So we really need your feedback after we're done today so that for next year we can hopefully plan an even better session. Those of you from Indiana know that everything we do in our state, we think about the Indy 500. So I think we're turning turn 4 coming down the straightaway, which is what we're doing here at this session today. So our final session is about emergency communications. Radio and TV stations are licensed to serve their local communities, and a critical part of that service, of course, is serving as a lifeline for listeners and viewers in times of emergency. Now, I'm sure everyone here today can relay an experience where you've had a storm. Maybe it's a thunderstorm, maybe it is a snowstorm that's blown through, like the one this week coming through the Midwest. And you know how much your listeners and your viewers depend on you for information. It's actually what we do as broadcasters. It's what separates us from all the other forms of media, is that we're live and we're local. And for that reason, the Emergency Alert System, or EAS, is an integral part of emergency communications. It provides an easy way for government officials to quickly distribute a warning to the public, or in the case of an Amber Alert, to enlist the public's help in locating an abducted child. And ensuring that the EAS system is fully operational in each state and that stations are able to receive and transmit these life-saving messages to the public is the role of our state emergency communications committees. We love to abbreviate in this industry, so SECCs is the acronym. And for the next few minutes, we're going to be discussing EAS and emergency communications at the state and federal level, and what we all need to do to make sure that our stations stay on the air in the event of an emergency. So we are pleased today to be joined by the chairs of the SECCs for Indiana and Kentucky. And we're also delighted to have the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, their point person for the nationwide EAS National Public Warning System here with us. So let me introduce our panelists at the front of the room. I'll start with our distinguished guest from FEMA. Manny Centeno began serving as a project manager at the Federal Emergency Management Agency in June of 2010. As a Department of Homeland Security FEMA program manager, he leads sustainment and operations of the National Emergency Alert System, the National Public Warning System, or NPWS network, also known as PEP stations. Manny implemented and leads the IPAWS laboratory and the Joint Interoperability Test Command. Say that quickly 3 or 4 times. You probably can do that, Manny, that's my guess. And it is a component of the Defense Information Systems Agency, and he oversees the design and the modernization and enhancements to NPWS stations. He has successfully planned, managed, and conducted the first ever nationwide test of EAS back in 2011, and other test events and exercises leading up to the national EAS test. Manny is also a broadcaster. He has experience as an on-air announcer, a manager, a sales executive, and an engineer. He has extensive firsthand experience in operating stations during disasters and through recovery. And in fact, in 2017, he was deployed to the Virgin Islands to assist in maintaining broadcast capabilities in the aftermath of Hurricanes Irma and Maria. And now to our two SECC chairs who are on the rostrum today. Dan Mettler, Senior Vice President of Engineering Central Region for iHeartMedia, and he serves as chair for the Indiana SECC. He was previously the Regional Vice President for the Central Region of Clear Channel Radio, and has also held similar positions with SFX Broadcasting, Capstar Communications, and AM/FM Radio. Dan was named Director of Engineering for the now iHeartMedia-owned cluster in Indianapolis starting in 1987. In 1995, he added the Director of Engineering responsibilities for the Bob and Tom Show, which is nationally syndicated and based in Indy. He started his radio career as a disc jockey in 1979. He worked in engineering and on-air through college before making broadcast engineering his career. He holds a degree in electronics engineering from ITT Technical Institute and is a member of SBE and active in the National Radio Systems Committee. Scott Cason, on the end, is Director of Engineering and Technology for the Kentucky Broadcasters Association. He serves as chair of the Kentucky SECC. He's also one of Indiana's ABIP inspectors. Scott began his career in broadcasting at his hometown radio station in Vienna, Georgia, and after a few years as a DJ at several different radio stations, he decided to change course. He attended the South Georgia Technical College, obtained a degree in communications electronics, and returned to broadcasting as an engineer in 1990. He worked at network affiliates in several markets in Georgia, the Nashville Network in Nashville, and WHAS-TV in Louisville, before coming back to radio as a chief engineer of a 6-station radio cluster in Louisville owned by Blue Chip Broadcasting. In 2004, Scott left corporate life and formed his own consulting firm, LaGrange Communications, which he continues to operate along with his ownership of a radio station in Vevey, Indiana. It's spelled Vevey, but in Indiana we say Vevey.
I thought we said
The same way we say Versailles rather than Versailles. So it's good to have a fellow Hoosier sort of on the panel up here today. So Manny, I wanted to actually start our discussion with you, and really at a high level, from your standpoint at FEMA, what about the importance of over-the-air broadcasting and its reach across our great country, and especially as compared to some other technologies that are obviously also used for emergency preparedness?
Good afternoon, Dave, and thanks everyone for being here. I expected a much lesser amount of people here, so I'm very surprised and happy. So broadcast, in my view, and in our world, is the backbone of emergency communications. It is now, it has been, and it will be for the foreseeable future. It is the only thing, and I'll underscore that, the only method to reach the public in major emergencies. Count them. Go back over the decades, all the major disasters, including the fires in California, the storms in the Gulf, the storms in the southeast coast, the storms in the Caribbean, the hurricane in the Bahamas, although it's not part of the U.S. What continued to operate was radio. Right after, television. Then you have cell phones and other things, right? So you've got to consider that in your planning. And we are also saying this to the emergency managers around the country at the state and local levels. Broadcasters provide the first informer position for the public. They talk to the public. And as such, we need more of the authorities to understand that and not treat broadcasters as just simply media or reporters or the press. So in order for this all to work, we both have to work together, all of the sectors, broadcasters, state and local authorities, and federal authorities, so that we can have a well-rounded capability to reach the public in times of emergencies beyond the emergency alert system. All right, so I'm a proponent of EAS. I've been involved with EAS for many years. Love it. I think it could be better, but it's what we have. We'll try to make it better as we go. But long-form programming post-emergencies is key as well. And one of the things that happens, next week I'm going to be at the Emergency Managers Association, the international meeting conference in Savannah, Georgia. And I'm going to be addressing the emergency managers that are coming from around the world to talk to them about broadcasters. Because what happens is the emergency managers tend to leave us out of the scheme. They treat you as you're just press. They invite you to the press conference. They will send you a press release, but they don't treat you as partners in getting that information out to the public that they need. There's been way too many lessons learned, and we're now in almost 2020, and they're not adopting it. So we're going to be talking to them, doing the same thing we're doing today, but to that side and trying to bring those two sides together.
All right, let's move down the line and just get some initial comments underway. Dan, from your standpoint, how has, you've been State Emergency Communications Chair for how long in Indiana?
Oh, geez, I don't even, 15 years maybe? I kind of lost track because the pay is so great that my bank account keeps growing, so I never remember. So, probably 15 years, yeah.
What has changed in that 15 years, and what problems do we continue to surmount year to year?
So, obviously the big change was the change from EBS to EAS, and I don't even know what was the year that we did that, because it's been such a long.
94, 95.
Okay. Yeah.
It started being regulated in 97.
Yeah. So certainly that was a big change, and certainly a leap forward. Challenges are stuff like we just went through last week, where the certificate from the FEMA servers expired, and it took a big group of people to get a large amount of work done in a very short amount of time. Things like that where we are advancing in technology, but we're trying to keep up with everything that happens in order to make that happen. So.
And yet, as Manny mentioned, the underpinning is sort of a traditional system, right? The daisy chain, which we all lament the quality of the daisy chain. We'll come back to that question because I know that was the last EAS test. Scott, from your standpoint in Kentucky, similar to Dan in terms of the last few years, what do you guys deal with?
It's been pretty much similar the last few years. I've only been the emergency chair for like the last year or so, and our EAS plan was woefully out of date. We have an educational television network that reaches the entire state, and we're working at getting them involved to getting the system out. But to touch on what Manny said earlier about the underpinnings of broadcasting, I'm seeing all these cars drive past on the interstate, and every one of them has their radio on. And if anything were to happen, that they would need to get the message out quickly. Broadcasting is it. Radio is it. They're not watching television. Well, hope they're not watching television. But you never know any day.
That's ATSC 3.0.
Exactly. Yeah. But radio is the way to get out to the mass easily, quickly, and effectively. And when we approached our emergency managers in Kentucky about wanting to get more involved, they were open to it. They were trying to figure out a way how to get the broadcasters involved, and we're glad that we reached out to them in order to improve our system in Kentucky. So you do have some EMA directors who understand broadcasting's role in it.
Yeah, I think, Dan, maybe you could speak to our experience in Indiana on Amber Alerts. The state police very deeply involved with us and making sure those work properly.
Yeah, I was looking through my pages. That's the one thing that as EAS participants, and also there's regional chairs in this group, opening up the line of communications to your region, emergency management folks are huge, because a lot of times they don't know that you exist, or they don't understand. The one thing that we've learned is they don't understand what EAS is. Even though they have heard the duck quacks on the air for years, they still don't understand it. And we met with state police and emergency management folks and explained it to them. Explained, not only what the information we transmit, but also how the daisy chain effect works. If you're utilizing that, they just don't understand. And you'd think in where we are in technology that they would, and they don't. But I encourage the broadcasters in this room to reach out to even in the small town. There's an emergency coordinator for every small town, and just to let them know you're there. Here's the number for the radio station or the TV station, and say, hey, if we have a disaster, would you need to alert? We're your point of contact to get to all the people that live in the area.
So I know we had hoped to have Greg Savoldi, who is the SECC chair for Ohio here. Greg is under the weather, but fortunately he reports to Dan. So Dan, put on your Greg hat. I mean, what issues does he deal with?
Same thing. I mean, we talk a lot about that, about the same topics, and it's the same that Scott has his same scenarios. The Ohio state plan is very well refined, and one of the great things about the state of Ohio's emergency alert system is they've got the backbone of the OET for transmission, so that really helps. And there's not a lot of states that have that. So I mean that is the one thing. And when I look at the state plan that Greg has, I'm always amazed how well it's definitely complicated because Greg's involved and he's way into redundancy and everything. But that is I have to tip my hat because their plan, the Ohio plan, is very good. So the one thing that Greg did want me to relay. I was texting with him this morning for the Ohio broadcast, and this is not only for the Ohio broadcast, for everybody who did software updates last week. If you did the Sage update, please go back and confirm your audio levels in your decoders, because there's a default at like 100, and depending on where things and how your update went, you could have some really bad audio. I know yesterday was the Ohio State RMT, and I heard, Paul, I actually heard yours in Dayton as I was driving over here, and it sounded good, so I was glad to hear that. But I do know that there has been a little bit of a bug in the audio level. And that's one thing that Greg said: just have everybody relayed to everybody that they check the audio levels. And with the current version of software, it's a click on a tab and you can see it. So
Manny, a lot has changed in the last few years. The internet is now a major source of sending information, and yet at the last national EAS test, on purpose, you wanted to try out the daisy chain. There were some major failures in Georgia and other places. Without throwing people under the bus, I mean, did it go as you expected? Did you expect that there were going to be some issues, and what does that teach FEMA in terms of the future?
Yeah, I've definitely expected to be failures because we haven't done it since 2011, and there hasn't been a whole lot of follow-up on 2011 test. There has to be more testing, and there has to be more incremental improvement as we go. We've got to provide more sources for monitoring. There were some PEP stations that did not air it for some technical reasons. I actually had a slide of that here somewhere with some of the
Andy's going to help you with that.
key points. So, it's technology that's supposed to be working 24/7. We test the heck out of it twice a week. We actually did a PEP station testing through the EAS device there. I think it's a little further down. That worked successfully, and then on obviously the day of the test, things don't always work out. We did find out, however, because we don't normally test the PEP stations on the air, that there were some switching issues at some of the stations where audio switches are used, and to switch those devices onto the transmitter. We also found some very quirky EAS device issues that we're working with the manufacturer on. If you don't mind going down to that slide about the test. Thank you. Whoops. What did I do? We had premature EOMs, end of message situations where the headers would go out and then it would automatically state premature EOM on the box. We don't know where that came from. We've never seen that behavior before. That happened in a handful of stations. So what we've done with those PEP stations, keep going one more, or maybe before that, there you go. What happened with those, we replaced all the equipment. And what we're doing now is we're running RWTs through those stations that failed, just to make sure that all of the switching is worked out, that there were no issues with grounding or with phasing of the audio that may have caused some problems. For those that worked, they worked really, really well, and they were very clean. Now, in terms of expanding the number of sources for PEP source, or the NP source, I'm working with SiriusXM to make that squawk channel they have available. And we're going to be testing a few of the receivers that are commercially available. Those run anywhere between $40 and $100. They're very inexpensive. And that could be a receive source for a national signal, a national EAN, should you not have a source nearby, or through this daisy chain, your source is far away, it's noisy or distorted. So we're going to be introducing some of that. For those of you that are Premier broadcast, from Premier radio network affiliates, there is a squawk channel there. Didn't work well in the test.
It didn't at all, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. So we're working with the folks out there in California to see what may have not triggered beyond it. The device worked, but there was some switching issue going on there. As always, we are still seeing television crawl issues, size, position, color, and speed. I personally still think that the FCC should provide at least some specification to follow, because if not, people will set up their television crawl generators which way they want. There's got to be some uniformity to this. There are about 15 states that don't really identify the PEP source, NP source in their plans, so we're going to be talking to them about that. Everyone here did ETRS. Everyone's done their filing. The FCC is looking into it, and we'll have a report in the future. I'm not going to talk much about it. But in general, though, although there were issues, if we had to use the system today, millions would get the message. And just keep in mind, if the national authorities, the president, needed to send out an emergency action notification to the country, it wouldn't be sent once. This would be something that would be sent several times. And we would know which ones didn't air it, and we would target those specific areas to work with them to make sure that they do air it. It might come out 10 minutes later, but they would. Right now, we connect to those PEP stations terrestrially and through a satellite network. This test, I must admit, we had a big mistake made by the operator, and he didn't send it terrestrially. He only sent it over the satellite. Some areas were under a rain fade at the time. So those signals go out simultaneously, and whichever gets there first wins, and that's what's aired. In this case, nothing was sent, the headers weren't sent, so for those that missed the satellite one, they weren't able to activate on the terrestrial. That's all I have right now, but there is a lot of improvement to be made. I think that we need to continue to talk about the EAS and how to improve it. I believe in doing so in regions or by states, right? Instead of having a big national discussion all the time, because it's harder to improve when you have so many people in the room. But at the state level, at the regional level, that's where we need to be working, and then go from there downward to make sure that everyone's getting a good source of PEP in their state.
Manny, is FEMA still on NPR Squawk Channel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. As a matter of fact, some of the stations that didn't receive it via an NP or a PEP source received it over NPR. As a matter of fact, some of the PEP stations that had issues with their switching, the studio received it over NPR. So that was a good fail-safe.
Well, I do the engineering work for WFPL in Louisville, and I've got their Squawk Channel feeding into their EAS box.
Yeah.
And they got the national test from the Squawk Channel before they got it from WHAS.
Right. So that is, we've done some significant work with NPR to make sure that works. We obviously need to work with our friends at Premier a bit more. We're going to work a little bit harder with SiriusXM and see if we can announce that source is available, and it's available on conventional receivers, so that you could sticky note one up on your rack or something, and feed it in, because those things are inexpensive and the audio quality is pretty good coming out of it.
I want to spend just a second about audio quality. That's a really good point. Scott, in Kentucky, how do you deliver a good signal to the stations in general?
Well, in Kentucky, we're running our monthly test through our emergency management folks in Frankfurt. We start there with a very clean audio, the audio file that we play. We start with a clean audio file there. And from there, we've gone through our microwave chain between Frankfurt and KET's facility in Lexington and made sure that everybody is at, I've gone with -3 dB just to keep from distorting anybody. And from there, we sent it out over KET's network. And they've made sure that their audio levels are around 3 dB as well. That's the big thing is, like Dan mentioned with the update, is just make sure the audio coming into your box is not distorted and it's not hot. If it is, if you listen to it and you're getting distorted audio from one of your monitoring sources, call them and see if something is going on. After you've gone through all of your equipment, call them and make sure they're not having problems.
Obviously, we're all connected to the internet. There are Ethernet connections into our stations now. Indiana had a separate internet radio system for several years as kind of a bridge to get us from daisy chain to where we are today. We shut that off a couple of years ago, but the daisy chain is still frustrating because you're monitoring across long distances. Dan, can you say a word about like some of the things you've done at WFBQ with the barracks process?
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, we want to get, at least on the full daisy chain, but on the RMT side of it, we would like to start utilizing the FEMA cap servers, but we've run into some security issues there. But in the meantime, what we have done is added barracks boxes to from the head end or the state primary, which is WFPQ, to a handful of regions that are across the state. We still have, and it's literally on my plate, is to add another 4 to the state. So for Indiana broadcasters, that will hopefully help populate the state of Indiana for your RMT. Unlike Ohio and Kentucky, Indiana does not have a statewide educational network to utilize. So I've got one hand tying behind my back here on this, but. So we're using the barracks technology and putting a decoder at locations, and like I said, we're trying to expand that network. But again,
Manny, looking forward to 2020, I presume we're going to have another national test, maybe next summer or next fall. Any idea what's coming that you can tell us at this point?
No, at this time I'm not sure when it's going to happen. What I'm really floating as an idea is to do some regional testing and some state testing. I think that's a little bit more manageable in terms of finding solutions to problems. National tests are great, but it's a big nation. It's a large area that we have to address. Now there are ways to test these things, whether it's an NPT or live code, but also there's a way to do it via an RMT. As a matter of fact, I was in Wisconsin about a month ago at their broadcasters conference, and we are going to be doing RMTs through the PEP system from the Federal Emergency Management Agency that will test their circuits there as well as ours. So if anyone's interested in doing that and you're doing your regular RMTs, we can actually issue some of those. That will help to work some issues out at that level that would then improve the system as we go, and especially see improvements in other national tests. If you would prefer a live test, we can help get a waiver. We can do some live exercising of the system like we've done, which I'd like to talk to you about a little bit later. This stuff works. I think it gets a lot of folks involved. I like to do things with a lot of outreach, preparation, best practices before we actually do the test. The point of doing a test is to improve, right? Is to find out what went wrong. So if there's little information up front, there's little information after, then we've improved nothing. So that's kind of the approach that we are hoping to take next time.
Yeah, you make a point I was going to make, which is I'm reminded of a boss that I used to have. I used to work for the mayor of Indianapolis many years ago, and his father was a minister, and he used to say from the pulpit, the biggest room in the house is the room for improvement, which I think is true. So, I mean, we could look at this chart and say, well, 11% of the country didn't get the national test. But I think another way to look at that is for that 11%, whether it was the terrestrial issue or whatever, there's an 11.84% opportunity to improve.
Right.
And that's the whole purpose of doing these tests.
Yes.
I think just to underscore what Dan mentioned about Indiana, we are frustrated by our state Homeland Security people who seem to change more frequently than some people change socks. It's just hard. Many of the people in this room have been doing this stuff for a long time, so it's frustrating. But I would agree that if I can have the pulpit for a moment, that testing is really critical. It's really
Yes.
important to us. I want to back up on one of your slides and let you talk a little bit. This is a Windows device. I'm not sure I know how to operate. There we go. I want to have you, Manny, talk about credentialing and from your standpoint at FEMA, why this is so important.
Right. So our PEP station partners, like Dan and iHeartMedia and some of the others, those station engineers, station personnel, management, on-air program folks may apply for a FEMA personal identification card. This is a federal government credential. In the bottom, it says Federal Emergency Response Official. All right? Why is that important? Well, have you ever tried to get through a barricade, a curfew in an emergency, to get to your site to provide a public safety service? It happens a lot where a lot of sheriffs around the country, a lot of deputies around the country don't equate a broadcaster with first responders or with folks that need to be out there doing their job, and they want to look at it as you're just media again, you're just you're reporters. This helps. This also helps tie up our broadcast community to the first responders themselves, all right? To include them in the things that we do, not just in the federal level, but also the local and the state levels. We've been doing some exercises. There's a slide about that too, and there's a video that I want you to see, where we are linking the broadcaster, in this case the PEP stations. For example, we did it at LW in Cincinnati last year in October. We had a 4-hour broadcast from there. We'll show you that video in a bit. We've done it in Greenville, South Carolina, where we bring in the state and local emergency officials. The lieutenant governor showed up. We did an entire morning of programming from the emergency shelter at the transmitter site. The fire chief, the police chief, all these people contributed to this broadcast, and what that helped do is to just establish that link and establish that connection that we hope will continue to be exercised and grown. We've done this in Connecticut. We're close to doing one in Alaska and in San Diego. We did it in Puerto Rico last year in the 1-year anniversary of Hurricane Maria there. It really works when our broadcast community is well aligned with the authorities in the area. And I think what results is obviously better informed individuals and communities. It creates a better psychological connection with your audiences and viewers, right? When you have, the government folks, the first responders, and that information, that critical information on where you get water, ice, insulin, what gas stations are open, all of those services made available to the public via the broadcaster. So one of the things that I preach constantly is when state governments, and this may include some of the federal agencies as well, are managing a major emergency, they tend to do press conferences. For example, I saw that a lot in Puerto Rico, and it kind of irked me because I'm saying, well, they're not watching TV. They have no power. They have no roof. And the TV stations were all off the air. Radio was on the air, but they didn't have a link to get that audio of the conference to the radio. So I literally deployed down there to help do that stuff, to make those connections, to teach people that, look, instead of dropping leaflets from a plane, you can actually use the radio stations that are on the air and help them stay on the air. And that's because those connections were not made prior to the emergency. So there's a lot of work to do there. What we're trying to is to prove the concept, publicize it, and hope that we can get others interested in doing it.
Andy, I'm going to have you help see if we can get one of these videos operating. And while you do that, Dan, we got word that the FCC is going to want to now revise state emergency plans and file them electronically. And Dan and I are both like, oh, God, we just got our plan approved. It only took 6 years. You oversee a lot of stations, a lot of states. So what do you think is behind that, and is that hopefully going to be a smooth process, or what do you see?
I actually do think it's going to be a smooth process. So what Dave's referring to is the FCC has come back to the state SECs and said we're going to have a standardized template for all of the state plans. So you can go to the Kentucky plan, you can go to the Ohio plan, you can go to the Illinois plan, and they will be template. They'll be basically a mirror image. Obviously, there's going to be different input information for different paths and so forth, but it'll be the same. So that each plan has the correct amount of information. I think Manny brought it up first. That you look at some plans and they literally have almost no information, and they've been carbon copied from five plans ago or whatever. So. That is in the works. Time-wise, don't know, but as you said, given the fact it took 6 years to get the current Indiana state plan, I hope it goes a lot faster than that process did, and being able to go through the approval process and get it out, because they'll know what they're looking for and they're not going to be individually checking. So I have high hopes, and the stuff that I've seen so far that I was involved in early on was going to have the right information. So, yeah.
Scott, tell us about Kentucky's relationship with law enforcement. Sounds like it's pretty strong. What do you do to encourage good connections?
We do have a pretty good connection with them, because they were the emergency management folks in Frankfurt were grateful that we reached out to them. Really, we keep the lines of communications open, and I've been meeting with our EMA folks about once every 2 or 3 months, and just kind of going over a few things that needed to be addressed. But just staying in touch with them. I think a lot of our emergency first responders look at us as, oh, it's them jackwagons from News Center 10. What do they want now? And they don't understand that we can work hand in hand with them to get the message out. Again, these people driving along the interstate, they're listening to the radio right now. And if anything were to happen, that law enforcement would need to get a message out very quickly to a large number of people. We're their connection. And I don't know how you could work with law enforcement if you don't have a good connection. I don't know where you would start to rebuild those relationships. I guess reaching out and trying to talk to them would be the first start, and just keep trying to, I don't want to say get in their faces because you'd wind up in jail, but just kind of, let them know that you're here and you want to work with them. And it's a lot easier on a more local level with my radio station in Vivi. When I reached out to our EMA director for Switzerland County, he was right on board. He understood the value that Froggy had for the area and was willing to work with us. And anything you guys want, I'm right here. He gave us his cell phone number, and just told us to call him anytime, day or night. And of course, me and my business partner gave him our cell phone numbers and said, if you need to get on the air, you let us know.
I guess it goes without saying, but I'll say it, that for those of you in the room, you do need to be connected to these guys from an emergency standpoint. So you need to talk to Scott if you're from Kentucky. You need to talk to Dan if you're from Indiana, or Greg if you're from Ohio, to make sure that you're part of the network and that things go the way they should. All right, Andy, are we good?
So before we go there, I just want
All
to
right.
kind of give it some context.
Sure.
So with the PEP stations, we're taking the concept of PEP to another step. We started the PEP program back in '95. I see some of our old members here from Richmond. I was a member of that group starting in 95, 96, and eventually became president of PPAC. That's how I got started with all this FEMA stuff. And it was basically power resiliency and fuel, right? So the original PEP stations had some audio equipment, but the main emphasis was power resiliency. Then we came out in 2009 with a new concept to put in backup transmitters at those sites with shelters, and we EMP protected the transmitter and the generator, and have had a very limited audio and audio on-air facility there. Now the new design I started in 2012 is being deployed. It is a completely containerized broadcast facility that covers all hazards. And all hazards means, your tornadoes, hurricanes, and flooding, in addition to chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear protection, air breathing protection, as well as HEMP. We've added a bed to the facilities. MREs for 60 days.
Propane toilet.
And an incinerator toilet. Yeah. So what
sounds
we
awesome.
What we're doing is
Hey, Dave, I'll buy you dinner at the WLW Transmitter. We'll eat MREs.
well, that's why the toilet is there. 'Cause
Skyline chili.
So this why? Well, we don't expect anyone to be trapped in there for 60 days, but we do expect someone to run it, right? And so you don't want someone having to run away every time they need to drink water. We have water there. There's some food there. There are some basic facilities. You can even lay down, turn on the automation system, and take a nap. So what we're doing is moving beyond the EAS a bit and creating an opportunity to support the public in those long-term emergencies, post-emergencies. So PEP stations really aren't there to be an initial warning tool, maybe back in the 90s and early 2000s. But as we started getting to cell phones and that, a quicker way of delivering information, we are keeping the PEP stations for alerts, but mainly for after the emergency happens, right? When every other form of communication is down. And in order to do that, we need to facilitate broadcasts. We need to facilitate the getting information on the air. So this exercise we ran with Dan Mettler's help, Jeff Littlejohn, DJ Hodge in the Cincinnati area at WLW was a 4-hour exercise, the on-air morning show with Billy Cunningham. And here's a bit of that.
Is that Bill Cunningham?
Bill Cunningham. We hope.
It's on that. You link it. You just.
It's not coming up on the board.
There it is. You want to rewind it a bit?
Is the audio all the way up?
Is the volume turned up on the computer? It's not coming through.
Because we have to notify you that I'm in a FEMA facility in Mason, and underneath more or less the trees.
Not much audio.
It's a,
Centeno of FEMA, and this is a serious matter. We'd like
So what he's doing, this is a live on-air program with Billy Cunningham, done from our shelter at the transmitter site at WLW. Basically to prove that we can broadcast from there for more than just a little bit. And it worked out marvelously. We were able to integrate the station's automation system to the shelter, had a server there as well, and they could run the entire operation there. We have Burke Arcs in there for remote. They can remote into the shelter over fiber and activate the transmitter, turn on the transmitter, and feed audio through that system from their studio if they were still able to do that. So that if their transmitter building or their main transmitters were inoperative, they could get the station on
Through
the
a
air.
transistor radio with fresh batteries, and where I am right now inside a FEMA facility in Mason.
And that's the way the federal government will communicate with you about
So
where
is
to go
this
to get
at the
food,
transmitter
where to go to
building?
get water.
This is
If you have
outside of the
personal
transmitter
communications to
building in
someone
two
maybe
separate
in
shelters.
Columbus or someone in
Okay.
Lexington
One is
or
a shelter
someone in
for the
Liberty
generator
Township,
and the
this
switching and all the
facility is
utilities.
what's going to provide
And the
that.
other one is a
And
transmitter
joining me
shelter
now
that,
is,
that has a small studio
Congressman
in it.
Steve Shabbat,
Which is what
with
you're
the
seeing.
federal government. Steve Shabbat, welcome again to the Bill Cunningham Show.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be with you.
You know, I came here with a little bit of a smile on my face thinking this is going to be fun. But when you're in
This
this
is an 8
facility,
by
this is not
20
fun.
Connex.
This is serious. So give us
We're
the
doing this out of.
circumstances from the U.S. government perspective where this facility would be turned on, in a sense taken over by FEMA to notify the American people where to
We don't
report.
take over anything. But Billy's dramatic. What we want is for the station to run it. If the station cannot, then we would come in and provide that service through whatever other means we have.
And the satellite feed goes into there as well, so the audio could originate from FEMA headquarters or wherever.
Yeah, we have, I installed an actual studio at our FEMA Operations Center, which is a secure location. And we have a full broadcast set up there as well.
People out there who may be wondering what's going on.
So if you can see in the background, I was going to bring that up. That's an NX10 NOD transmitter, so it's 10 kilowatts. It's tied to the switching network of LW, so it's right there and can go. And that's what happened. And it's fully powered it's self-contained. It's got its own power source, pulling off the underground fuel tank that's there at the site.
So the idea, the concept of these sites is that we would, if the station's transmitter is still available at 50 kW, we obviously want you to use that. If the emergency begins to prolong itself, then you don't want to be blowing the fuel too early. You don't want to be burning through it too quickly, because there are, although we are in a priority refuel status with the Department of Homeland Security, fuel is a major commodity after a disaster of major magnitude. The hospitals need it. First responders need it. Everybody needs fuel. So what we would do then is cut it back to the 10 kW. Provided that there is no power, the power grid is down, other stations are down, that 10 kW signal will go out pretty far. So that is the basic concept behind it, especially if there's an EMP attack or there's a major power grid failure around the country. This would become a beacon, and that information will go out the coverage would be much better than we think it would be.
So are you going to do multiple of these around the country? Is that the idea?
We are doing 35, which was the original PEP stations that we started with back in the mid-90s. At some point, we may be retrofitting or completely redoing what we call the expansion stations. Originally, just for context, the program started with about 70% of coverage, population coverage of the U.S. by 35, 37 stations. Back in 2009, we added another 30-something so that we can get 90%. So with all the PEP stations operating at full power, we get 90% of the U.S. population. What we want to do is, once we finish with this next 35 and bring them up to this standard, is try to go back and retrofit the 2009 design so that there could be more survivability and more operability where you can actually do this type of thing from it.
Yeah, the 2009 facility is it's basically power. It's a pod with a generator and fuel to provide and a 10 kilowatt they were 5 kilowatt transmitter.
Yep.
So, but no studio facility involved.
So I want to take questions. We have just a few minutes. While I solicit questions, guys, I want you to think about the 3 takeaways you want this group to have. I think it's all men. So you want the guys to take back. So one of them is probably check your SAGE or whatever output. That's number 1. But be thinking about the 3 things that we can leave this audience. And David can ask.
I'm sorry.
Well, let me take the mic and do a little bit more since Greg wasn't able to be here. I represent the Ohio Educational Television Stations, and Scott and I have been on phone calls together talking about this, and this is, I think, what Dan was talking about with Greg about what we've done in Ohio, and I'm not going to address any of the other things, but our public stations in Ohio are tied by secure state fiber. So we created an over-the-top solution using our television station's datacast capacity to deliver state messaging of all types Hopefully it's never used, but we relay what we get from FEMA. And given in the fact in the state of Ohio, and I would assume there are other areas, other states nearby that have areas where the internet isn't as reliable or strong, or we jump over the last mile internet to deliver this, and this was something FEMA and the IPAWS folks, Antoine was very pleased that we were able to offer and a solution of this type. Now, by doing that, we started building relationships with the first responder entities. And so when the state of Ohio just completed, I think it was Jim Jarvis, Region 6, helped the state put together or revise its emergency communications. For the first time, broadcasters appeared as being an option for how do you reach the public. So that type of thing works. We're trying to build and move into first responder service. We're tying that to ATSC3 and the additional bandwidth it will provide so we can offer some of these services and start on the state level so that everything is interoperative as we move down the line. So we're going ahead with this. We're building relationships is probably, as you said, is the most important thing here. By talking and being able to show, hey, look, we've got this thing that's been operating since 2016. I've got 45,000 emails in my files from the receiver machines, which send me emails, from the Sage machines that poll the receiver machines we installed at LP1s. We can track back, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something that originated through our weekly test of the Ohio Digital Emergency Alerting System. People knew what EAS was, so we just jumped on that. So we're looking to move in Ohio into first responders, and they asked us to present, and we showed some instances where we were able, other states were doing over the top or making plans to do so, and we were happy to help Scott and some components of our system made it into the earthquake warning system in California that's been introduced, and we've also informed the new state or the new federal advanced emergency alerting plans, as well as the planning that's underway in the state of Tennessee to build a comprehensive system. So,
Y'all have done an incredible job in Ohio, and
Indeed.
I've got since I'm redoing Kentucky's plan, I want to do mine just like yours.
So, go ahead.
Look,
and
so
I
what
got
I was
questions.
going to add to that, that's a beautiful thing. One of the ways to bring people to the table is to exercise, is to actually have an event, right? If you are able to get together with your SECC chairs and get your stations on the air in an exercise that's very public, where you would invite the governor and the mayors and the emergency managers and heads of first responder organizations, they would love it. They would eat it up. And that's your opportunity to underscore your importance. All right? Right, because they will show up because they want to be on the air and they want to be seen as people that are forward-leaning and care about public safety. If you just try to call them up to talk to them about it, they're busy, right? Put an event together. During that event, do 3 or 4 hours. If you can network some of your stations together, then all the better. That'll get everybody's attention, including the voting public, right? So one of the things that I tell the NAB and other folks is you got to create customers, right? You got to create demand for broadcast content. And that's one of the ways you can do it, is put it on the air. You've got the airwaves, right? You'll get people's attention immediately.
So David brought up a good point about future television technologies, Manny. So AWARN, the Advanced Warning and Response Network that's been put together for ATSC 3.0, new capabilities. Most of what we have today is radio-based, and I presume will continue to be. But you're, I presume, plugged into what's going to be coming down the path with ATSC 3. Can you just give the group maybe a snapshot?
Oh, absolutely.
of that?
I mean, we all know that the AWARN and ATSC 3 is going to bring some additional products to your television screen. There are some limitations, however. They're working on getting it through cable. A lot of folks now receive all of their TV through cable. I don't get it over the air where I live. So that it doesn't quite work there. There is no interface to plug that in that would get through your modem. So that's the limitation, but it's a step forward. I think it's going to help keep broadcasters going by providing additional safety messages. Not just to TV screens, but perhaps to other devices that folks are thinking about creating and developing. Yet, conventional radio and television is still a powerful source, and we shouldn't dismiss today's technology and product for what may be tomorrow. So I've been in this business since the mid-'80s, and one of the things that we do, and I'm including myself in as a broadcaster because I still kind of do the broadcasting thing. We tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater for what's coming. For me, I would say, take this away with you today. Let's fix today. Tomorrow will be developed. We're going to have new, shiny, beautiful things tomorrow, like AWARN, ATSC3. It's going to be great. HD radio has a lot of potential for many of the things that they're doing and the things that can be done through it. But today, we got to take care of today, because 10 years from now, we're going to be sitting here again talking about what's going to happen in the next 10 years, but we haven't taken care of the last 10. So that's something that I would say to you is take care of those EAS boxes. Make sure you have a good source, a clean one. If you don't have one, seek it. Try to find a way to do it. Participate, as the gentlemen have been saying, with your local authorities and your state authorities, and you will see a big improvement. How many folks here, I want to ask a quick question. How many folks here are in programming or management? Good group, thank you. We need more folks from programming and management and ownership in these discussions as well. Engineers obviously keep it running, but we also need management, right, to understand these things so that they can spend a little bit more money perhaps in the engineering departments around these stations.
That'd be nice.
To do the things that are necessary, like resiliency, like the public service that the audiences expect to have. That's my pulpit for
Let's
today.
go. Let's wrap this up with the top three things. So Scott, we'll start with you. People in the audience, male and female, what shall we be taking away from today?
Can't think of three, but I can give you two.
Okay. Well, you're from Kentucky. It's okay.
Well, kind of,
I'm just kidding. I'm a Hoosier. Come on.
but I'm a Louisville fan, so. For one, the biggest thing is to reach out to your emergency management guys. If you don't know who the EMA director is for your county or for your region, call them next week and introduce yourself and tell them who you are. Because the Kentucky folks, when we set up our first meeting with them over in Frankfurt, had been discussing how they could get broadcasters involved. And your emergency management people may be sitting back wondering the same thing. How can we get our little FM station here in town involved? And they're just waiting, trying to figure something out. Don't be intimidated by law enforcement officers. I've got law enforcement in my family. The only reason I didn't become a law enforcement officer is because I didn't like getting shot when I went to work. But reach out to them and talk to them, offer them to take them to lunch, and just explain who you are, what you do, and that you want to help. And number two is keep watch on your EAS box with the levels going into it. Before the national test this past fall.
August 7th.
When was it?
August 7th.
August, okay. I think I spent a week on my EAS box at my radio station, making sure that the audio levels were correct and making sure it would pass audio. And don't just set it and forget it, because every once in a while something may happen to your receiver. And the next thing you know, either you have no audio or you have too much audio. And both of them are bad. And those are
All
the
right.
only two takeaways I can think of.
Dan?
Well, he stole my thunder on the no, but to the note on the EAS hardware. The one thing that gets overlooked just because it happens in the background is FEMA does weekly RWTs, and if everything is correct, your box should be decoding them, and you should have in your hardware, either a printout or however you reconcile your logs, you should have that information. You can sign up for an email reflector from FEMA that gives you the test times, when those happen for each week and every time zone. And my takeaway is that take the time to compare what was sent by FEMA and what your hardware is receiving, because the cap part of what we're doing now is very important overall, because National Weather Service is using it now. Emergency management has the capability. Whether they're using it is a local or / statewide thing. So
Yeah. It's growing slowly.
yeah. Another takeaway that not as much on the EAS side, but one of the things that I see happening a lot, and in facilities that have been hardened for years, that just kind of are like transmitter sites. I don't have time to get the transmitter sites. If you've got a generator, if you've got a backup transmitter, test it. I mean, make sure you got fuel. Make sure you got
Test it under load.
yeah, test it under load. Along with what Scott said about reaching out to the local contacts and letting them know. The one thing when you get into disaster mode, and Manny can elaborate on this, is having the contacts to get the resources you need. Fuel, diesel fuel, when you get into emergency is a critical scenario. Know the after-hour number for your diesel supply or your propane supply person. Also, hopefully if you've got a generator, know a number, an after-hour number for them to reach out, so you can reach out and find out if you can get a tech on site if you are having a generator problem. So I guess elaborating on what he says, get in contact with the people that are going to help you stay on the air.
Manny, thank you for making the trip here. You get the last word. What do you
Thank
want to
you.
send away?
So, ditto to everything that was said earlier. Do check, make sure that the input to your EAS device is not too hot. Not only could it be distorted, but it could make your machine reboot. There's at least 2 specific units that send a DSP into a wild spin, and it throws an error, and that line tells the unit to reboot. So maybe you've seen some of this. I see some smiles, so you may have noticed this in the past. The other thing is, if you don't mind switching back to the slide, the last one has my email address. I've been on my phone here trying to change my return to DC tonight, and it looks like I'm going to get stuck in Charlotte. So I'm going to try and bolt out of here, so I won't be able to talk to many of you after this, because I don't want to stay in Charlotte overnight. I have meetings tomorrow. But if you don't mind, if you want more information, email me at this number. If you want to work in your area on doing a public exercise, shoot me an email. We can help introduce you to the local and state emergency managers that could contribute to what you're trying to do. It is a lot easier than it seems. Typically, when they get an email from someone like me, they'll respond. But I want to thank you for continuing to work and provide this public service under this unfunded mandate. On behalf of FEMA, we thank you for that. We couldn't do it without you in good times, and we certainly can't do it without you when there are bad times. So thank you all for all you do.
All right, let's give them a round of applause. Manny, I have some concluding comments, but I'm going to let you scoot out the door to make sure you don't miss that flight. So this does conclude our Midwest Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Conference. Thanks to all of you for being here. And thanks also to our exhibitors, our door prize donors, and especially our sponsors, the Telos Alliance, Comrex, LG Electronics, Gates Air, Everts, NPR Distribution Systems, Sweet Life Systems, Fuelgraph Chimney and Tower, and Nautel. We do appreciate your commitment to our industry. Just a reminder that recordings of all of the sessions today are going to be available on the conference website in a few weeks. We will be sending an evaluation out to all attendees, so we welcome your feedback. We hope you have a safe drive home. We hope you listen to the radio on the way home. And Morgan, let's pack up that TV. How about that?